Hello, Susan. It's Wendy James here, Communication Director for James Solutions, Inc. It's nice to be with you today to talk about Lean Six Sigma. You and I have worked on Lean Six Sigma projects with great success over the past 10 years in so many industries and different projects. And before we get started today, while we're waiting for people, I wonder if you could just talk a little about why you think that the Lean Six Sigma was so effective in all these projects.
Yeah, that's a great question, Wendy, and thank you for moderating today. This was a presentation I gave the PMP group a couple of weeks ago. We had about 2,000 people register for it, and then everyone wanted to get the slides and all. So in order to do that, I thought I'll do it again and put it on my website. So thank you for moderating, and thank you for anybody that's joining. I think it's so powerful because it applies in every situation. I've worked with government people, I've worked in telecom and customer service and sales and finance, IT. Everywhere you go, this approach works because it starts with who's the customer, and then it makes you define what your scope and what your charter, what you're going to work on. And then it gives you a methodology that you just follow one step after the other to drive improvement. And the sign of the success of it is the number of job positions that are now asking for it in healthcare, in hospitals, all over globally. People are learning that this works, and it changes the way people think. So that's why I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Good. Well, I'd say, Susan, just with that brief intro, we're ready to get started. We're ready to get started today. We're going to talk about using Lean Six Sigma, using the approach to drive operational excellence. And it's my pleasure to introduce Susan Beecham, who's an MBA project management professional, Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and the owner of OpExecs and Beecham Consulting. Susan is an experienced operations leader and optimization consultant who works with executive leaders and their teams to drive breakthrough performance across multiple functions, supplier customer partner boundaries, and within multiple industries. She builds results-oriented programs by engaging with leaders to implement projects for growth while generating critical analysis for key decisions. Her track record includes delivery of more than 150 improvement projects worth more than $90 million. After working with GE as an electrical engineer for 12 years in manufacturing, sourcing, and quality, and in 2002, she launched a consulting company. Her clients included DuPont, Verizon Wireless, AT&T, General Electric, and the District of Columbia government. Together, they implemented significant programs to build executive teams and lead change, resulting in greater customer loyalty and value add. So Susan is going to get started today to talk about using the Lean Six Sigma approach to drive operational excellence. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome, Susan. Thank you for conducting this great program.
Thank you for that great introduction, Wendy. Wendy and I have been working together for years, and we've had a lot of fun doing this. I'm very excited to talk about this today. I've spent my career doing this. I'm very passionate about it for a couple of reasons. One, I've seen it drive significant results in companies and organizations. And two, it changes the way people think. And once they learn how to use the Lean Six Sigma approach to solve problems, then they want to do it more and more. And their management team sees that. They give them bigger, more important, more difficult problems to solve, and then they get better and better at it. So whether you're new to it and you just want to learn what it's about, or you're a leader considering starting to apply it in your organization, in this hour overview, I'll share with you, really the essence of what it's about. And then at the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll have time for questions. I did have some people send me some, and I'll do my best to answer all the questions that we have time to do. Please do submit these in the Q&A. So today we're going to first talk about what is operational excellence. We'll define that. And then how does Lean Six Sigma enable a company or an organization to begin a path towards pursuing operational excellence? We'll talk about the benefits of the approach and what companies have seen who've used it, how as a leader you would identify and execute a project. And then at the end, we'll talk about what type of opportunity do I have. Not every opportunity is a Lean Six Sigma opportunity, and not every opportunity can be useful for Agile. So I'll define these different project management approaches and then bring it all together and share with you what I think the best of each of these approaches are and how you can work them together. So let's start by defining what is operational excellence. And I just finished up a position as a VP of Operational Excellence for a commercial goods company. And I found it was important to define this because most people didn't have any experience with it. And we defined it as ensuring customer and business expectations are met on an ongoing basis by continuously, and here's the key thing, delivering, measuring, and improving value. So in order to do this, every company, every person in the company must see the flow of value. They must understand their impact on it and how they can affect that to the customer. And they work to drive it towards perfection. It's a continuous loop. You're always working to get better and better. And at the core of this, we've got to understand what's going on with our processes. And most of what we'll be talking about today is how to look at processes to begin to improve them. In order to deliver value, processes must be centered on the customer. They must be streamlined, safe, and efficient, and capable of consistently delivering value. So your pursuit of operational excellence is going to be focused on all these things. Lean Six Sigma is a methodology, it's a business philosophy. We'll talk about this in more detail that I've been using almost my entire career. And it's so powerful because it's a really practical, hands-on way that teams can begin to drive operational excellence. And people that have no familiarity with it, and once you teach them the methodology, they can start improving right away. So the methodology includes, it's a project-focused methodology, and there are 5 phases to every project: the define, the measure, the analyze, the improve, and the control phase. And we will walk through those today. Just a little bit of history on Lean and Six Sigma. I'll talk about them as they're different, and then talk about the power of combining the two. Six Sigma was developed by Motorola in the 80s, and it was based upon Walter Deming and other quality leaders' documentation of how to drive quality. Not anything new, but packaged together in a new way. Motorola started it because they were getting so many complaints from the field about phone quality, and they decided they really needed to fix that or they weren't going to be in business any longer. They thought they were going to have to invest millions of dollars, maybe billions, in doing this because at the time everyone assumed it costs money to improve quality. But they found the opposite. They actually found that they saved money by improving their quality. And this caught the attention of a lot of other companies. One of them was GE, and I was with GE at the time in the mid-90s when our CEO got the results of an employee survey where the employees identified their biggest concern for the long-term future of the company was the focus or lack thereof on the quality of our products and services. So he decided to go after this in a big way, talked to some of his peers, one of them, Larry Bossidy at Allied Signal, and decided to pursue a Six Sigma approach, just like Allied Signal. What Jack did that was unique was, first of all, he insisted that it be applied beyond manufacturing into service organizations, finance, healthcare, everything that GE did, even HR and IT, all of these functions and industries were going to have to learn how to use it. So he trained people all throughout the company, high potential leaders. And then the other thing that GE did was they added a define phase to the whole methodology to make sure that you could assign financial benefit to the project at the start, and you would measure that all the way through to deliver the results and be able to measure how much that meant for the company. Around the early 2000s, well, even before this, Toyota was implementing what they called the Toyota production system. Later, many elements of this became known as lean manufacturing. And it was very, very powerful and effective. Lean, as we will learn, is focused on eliminating waste and using the people closest to the process to improve the process. And it's a very powerful approach because results are relatively quick and they impact the customer, the employee, the entire process. And due to the success that Toyota had with Lean, it became popular in other automotive companies and then expanded to other manufacturing companies, and now it's being used throughout the enterprise. They call it Lean Enterprise instead of Lean Manufacturing now. And it's so powerful that you're hearing about Lean and Six Sigma, not just in manufacturing now, but also in technology, in telecom, finance, in healthcare, and government. Its success has led to it being expanded and used throughout many different industries and all over the world. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about Six Sigma, and then I'll bring in the Lean, and then we'll bring the two together. So what is Six Sigma? It's a statistic, it's a quality goal, a methodology, and a management philosophy. And we're going to explore each of these in a little bit more detail. So looking at this picture on the left, we're imagining that this is a pretty complicated thing to do, to take a rocket ship, launch it into the atmosphere, and then bring it back again with all the people, all the equipment, everything intact, and the mission accomplished. As you can imagine, in order to do this, you need to understand measurements and statistics, and a whole lot of them, to make sure that things are going to be consistent and reliable, and that you're actually going to succeed in your mission. But Six Sigma also can apply to a lot of different applications, and they don't have to necessarily be as complicated as launching a rocket ship. It's all based on how you look at measurements. So if you can imagine, if you see this diagram on the left where you've got a bullseye and you've got the blue dot in the center, if you imagine that's your customer's target, and the X's, those are your outputs. Those are the results of your process. You can have one of three problems in your process. The first problem you could have is being off-center. So this is where you're pretty consistent in your output, but you're not meeting the customer's target. Let's say, for example, that your customer requires you to deliver within a day, and you're able to deliver within 2 days, plus or minus, let's say 3 hours. Well, that's pretty consistent, the 2 days plus or minus 3 hours, but it's not meeting your customer's target. So we would call this off-centered. The other problem you can have is too much spread or variation. This is where, on average, you're centered on your customer's target. So in our example on the on-time delivery, maybe you deliver in 2 hours and sometimes in 8 hours, but other times it takes you 2 or 3 days. When you average it all together, you're delivering to meet their 1 day requirement. But the customer doesn't live at the average. They live at each of these points that you're delivering, and they can't count on you to be consistent or reliable. So that's a problem with too much spread. Or you could have both problems, which is often what you get into when you haven't measured things in the past. And the goal of Six Sigma is to, number one, reduce spread or variation, and number two, center the process. So using Six Sigma is all about understanding what are the root causes driving your variation and your off-centering, and controlling those to bring your process to be both centered and on target consistently and reliably, so that your customer knows you're going to meet that need every time. So that's the statistic aspect of it. Six Sigma is also a quality goal, and it is a highly excellent quality goal. If you're producing something, whether it be a service or you're providing a service or you're producing a product, if you're operating at a Six Sigma level, it means that you generate no more than 3.4 defects per million opportunities, which, as you can imagine, is an extremely high level of quality. Most companies are somewhere between 3 and 4 Sigma, and that would be somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 defects per million opportunity, which is the same as saying between 90% and 99% good. A lot of people would say that's pretty good. In just a minute, I'll share a chart with you that says, you know what, that might seem 99% might seem good enough, but maybe it's not, considering what you're doing. If you have not measured a process, and we get into a lot of opportunities like this, you often find that you're 0 or 1 Sigma, and just by measuring that process, you can bring it to 2 or 3 Sigma just by focusing on it. And with some fairly easy to do solutions, you can see significant improvement that your customer will feel. This is where lean comes into play. This is where really just putting a measurement in place can be helpful. But to get from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 Sigma usually requires advanced techniques and more focus and better understanding of what the root causes are. So breaking this down a little bit further, what is the difference between 3.8 Sigma, 99% good, which most people would say, hey, that's great performance, and 6 Sigma, or 99.99966% good? And I like to take that third example. Let's say that you are a major hospital network in a metropolitan area, like in my area of Philadelphia, it's Penn Medicine. If you're operating at 3.8 Sigma, that means that you're doing 5,000 incorrect surgical operations per week versus 6 Sigma, 1.7 incorrect operations per week. Now, if you had information on a hospital that was, let's say, doing knee surgery and you were going to have that type of surgery, wouldn't you choose the 6 Sigma hospital? The other example that we could point out now is a homicide rate in a typical city, American city, like in Washington, D.C. If the city was at 3.8 Sigma in terms of homicides, they would have 6,300 a year, versus a 6 Sigma would be 2 homicides per year. And again, if you had a choice of which city to live in, I think most of us would probably pick the 6 Sigma city. You don't get there in one shot. Often people will ask, if I'm starting this journey, do I have to be at 6 Sigma right away? No, it takes time to get there. But most would agree that this is a very high standard of excellence. And if you can differentiate yourself from others because of this high standard of excellence, you can argue that that will mean more loyalty from your customers, more revenue, more opportunity for your organization. 6 Sigma, we call it DMAIC, that stands for the Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and Control, is a data-driven methodology. And this is what I find perhaps most powerful about it, is that if you have no familiarity with 6 Sigma, you can start a project simply by following this methodology. And in just a few minutes, we'll talk about what you do in each phase. But the result of using this approach is, number one, you're going to increase your customer satisfaction and loyalty, because in the define phase, you're very focused on who's the customer and what's critical to quality for them. So as you work on projects and opportunities that impact them, that will increase their loyalty to you and you'll get more business. I saw this with the previous position that I was in, where we didn't know where to start. So we said, where do we have customers who are complaining about what we do? And we picked a couple of instances with a couple of operations, and we just focused on understanding what that customer need was and driving improvement. We made such impact that the customer grew their revenue with us. And in one case, they decided to make us their primary partner. And this was after only working with them on the project for about probably 8 months. So you can have pretty quick impact that you feel. It's also a way to achieve business strategies. Often strategies are set without necessarily a way to achieve them, or teaching people how to go about driving improvement to those strategies. This is a way to do that. So if you have a strategy that's not getting off the ground, Lean Six Sigma can help. It'll reduce your cost of poor quality, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. And interestingly enough, it'll help you identify innovation opportunities. Because in the define phase, when you're talking to your customers, often they'll tell you things that are very important to them that you're not measuring. You might not even have that capability. So the first thing you have to do is go innovate, go create that capability for them. Often in the government, I would see this case where there was a regulatory requirement that had to be met and nobody was measuring it. So the first thing we had to do was create that measurement system. And then finally, I found time and time again that working on these types of opportunities has a huge impact on employee morale, because they're the ones that are driving the improvement. If you teach them how to solve problems, it's very empowering, and people will notice and ask them to solve more problems. And it has a way of boosting the morale of everybody who's involved. And then finally, Six Sigma is a management philosophy requiring a relentless focus on meeting your customers' needs. So whether your customer is a patient or family member of a patient that's being transported in an ambulance to a hospital, or they're a leader that's managing a facility, a warehouse facility, and they care about your on-time and accurate delivery to their warehouse. These are all customers. It's important to have a definition. The customer is going to be the direct or indirect recipient of the product or service you provide. Every process has customers who are internal and external. The customer ultimately is the one, organization or person, who determines whether the product or process that you're providing is operating at an acceptable level. And every Six Sigma project has to begin and end with the customer. So the customer helps you determine what the scope is, and at the end, they're the one that tell you, yeah, it's getting better. I feel the improvement. An example of an internal customer, people ask me this a lot. Let's say you're in a finance organization and you're providing reports to the leaders of your organization, and those reports are being used to make decisions. That leader or those leaders are your customer, and what they likely care about, what their critical quality characteristics are likely how timely is your report, how accurate is your report, and does it have the information that they need to make decisions included. So that's a very valid project, and that it's a great place to start. This management philosophy also requires that you focus on data, and data is going to help you hold the team accountable to meeting your customers' needs. Ask yourself, what measurements get attention in my organization? Because we value what we measure. We don't question what we don't measure. And if we can't express what we know in the form of numbers, we really don't know much about it. So let's say you're in an organization that's highly financially focused, and you have a lot of different measurements about profitability, about contribution margin, but you don't have many measurements about, let's say, on-time delivery or meeting your customers' needs. You're likely going to struggle with growing your revenue because you're not measuring the things that are important to your customer. The flip is also true. I've been in organizations that are very concerned with the customer, listen to the customer, and innovate in ways that they can't necessarily afford given their price structure. So a complete customer focus without a finance focus is also a problem. So one thing to take away from this is, as you start in a journey like this, an improvement journey, look at your culture and say, what are we telling people about what's important for us to measure? I've also been in cultures where they're measuring too much. There's so many things on the table that get reviewed that it's almost meaningless because nobody knows on a day-to-day basis what the most important focus is. So measurements are very important in driving your culture and determining where you would start in improvement. And it's a good first question to ask. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about Lean and how that adds to Six Sigma, because Lean is more focused on speed and waste reduction. And when you combine this with the data-driven problem-solving approach of Six Sigma, you get a very, very powerful methodology that enables you to see quick results, engage your people, and determine measurements that are going to connect with your customers and that you can use to sustain improvement over time, all the while driving operational excellence. Lean thinking is not new. It's been around for a long time. One of the earliest examples was Eli Whitney, who took an order with the US government to manufacture 10,000 muskets within 2 years. And everybody said it could not be done because at the time, this manufacturing process was more art than industry, I would say, where each musket was made uniquely with unique parts. And Eli and his team changed the whole process by using standard interchangeable parts. And even though they didn't deliver all of those 10,000 within 2 years, they were, I think, maybe 5 or 10 years. But right after that, they got another order for 15,000, and all were of higher quality than what had been made before. So it was sort of revolutionary at its time. And then, of course, you had Henry Ford and the Model T production that was focused on a very few number of products and doing those in a very efficient manner. And then actually in World War II, the Japanese were very impressed with the Americans' ability to get supplies and food, etc., to the front line quickly. And they began to examine, why is it? What is America doing differently that we can learn from? And that was the original start of some of this lean thinking that took off in Japan. in the latter part of the last century. So lean is all about maximizing process velocity by eliminating waste. And what do we mean by that? It's how much can you produce in a given amount of time. And in the example of Eli Whitney, it's how many muskets could he get through his process in 2 years. And the way he did that was by identifying and eliminating waste. In his case, the waste was related to a custom manufacturing process that was different every time. By standardizing that, he enabled the team to produce things in a way that's much more efficient than previously done. The impact of this is going to be, first of all, you'll reduce cycle time and cost by eliminating waste. Second of all, you'll improve the use of your resources, and you're going to increase customer satisfaction because you're providing the value faster and better than before. You're also going to engage your employees in a new way because they're the ones you teach, they're the ones you train, they're the ones you give the information to root cause the problems and to come up with solutions. And then finally, there's a facilitated workshop called a Kaizen that we use in the world of lean that helps us yield immediate results. And when you learn more about lean, you'll see that Kaizen can be applied in a 2-hour session, or it can be in a week session. But the point of it is to bring data, bring information into the workshop, to use the people who do the job every day to identify solutions, and then to implement those solutions live so that you can see the impact as quickly as possible. So combining lean with Six Sigma allows you to combine the principles of speed and immediate action with a Six Sigma focus on improving and sustaining quality from the customer's perspectives. It's a winning combination. And if you try to do one without the other, you're not getting the full benefit. I've seen organizations that just want to do lean, and often their results are not sustainable, and people have to come back and redo the same effort 6 months down the road or a year down the road because they weren't measuring what the impact is, or they weren't really connected with the customer need. And I've seen organizations just do Six Sigma, and sometimes that can bog down and take too long because you're not implementing quick hits as you learn. So in my experience, the best approach is to combine the two together. Now we'll talk a little bit about, from a lean perspective, how do you go about doing this? How do you go about streamlining an operation? And there's really 5 main principles that you have to apply. I'll talk through each one of them. The first is you have to define what's value. What's valuable for your customer? And if you look at that diagram below, here's the definition that I teach people. We'll start with value adding, the top triangle. Value adding steps are ones that are essential because they physically change either the product or the service you're providing, the customer is willing to pay for them, and they're done right the first time. So any type of rework loop or inspection, that's not value adding. Value enabling, these are steps that are not essential to the customer, but they do allow the value adding tasks to be done better and faster. You know, at a very high macro level, HR and finance, these might be functions in an organization that the customer is not directly willing to pay for, but they have to be there or you're not going to be able to provide the value adding to the customer. And then finally, non-value adding, these are steps that are not essential to produce and deliver the product or service, and the customer is unwilling to pay for these steps. And when you go through an analysis of your process and you identify what's value adding, what's non-value adding, what's value enabling, these non-value adding steps are like gold because they're the first thing that you attack. You'll commonly find that there are steps where there's just a delay built into the process that's not necessary. Sometimes there are multiple approval levels that are not necessary. Sometimes people are doing the same thing 2 or 3 times and they don't realize they are. This is really where you focus to try to streamline your process. Okay, but going to the top again. After you define what is value adding for the customer, the next thing you do is map the value stream. And so that's from the very beginning of the supply of either the raw material or the information you need, if it's a service or a digital process, all the way through to providing the service or product to the end customer. You want to map that out at a high level and then at a more detailed level, perhaps, to identify opportunities. And identifying that opportunities is going to now enable you to do the next thing, which is create flow. So flow is products or services that are moving through your organization without stopping. Anytime something has to stop, you've interrupted flow. and it's going to take you longer to do it. And that's something you want to drill into and find out, why did we stop the flow? What do we need to do to address it? The next step is to establish pull. What is pull? Pull is operating at your customer's demand rate instead of your own preferred rate. So customers will demand products or services from you, whether they're patients that show up in an ER, or they're customers that show up at a Subway that need a sandwich, or they're customers that are buying a product off the shelf. They're going to pull that at a certain rate. It's important for you to understand that rate so you can align your organization with it. If you don't do that, you're going to end up sometimes having too many resources and too much investment, and other times not having enough. So understanding the rate at which your customer is pulling from you is very important for you to set up the most lean, streamlined process that you can. And then finally, pursuing perfection. This is all about continuous improvement. We're never done. We're always trying to get better and better. If you think about that extreme goal of Six Sigma, you're always trying to move in that direction towards excellence. And we use this DOWNTIME acronym to describe waste. It's the opposite of adding value. And I'd like to take a few minutes just to go through an example of downtime. And I like to think of our local grocery store, because there's opportunities in all of these different types of waste, starting with defects. Defects are very costly because somebody has to address them, eliminate them. In a grocery store, an example of this might be yogurt or milk that goes out of date, so it expires while it's sitting on the shelf. Not only are you not going to be able to get the revenue from that product because nobody's buying it, but now you've got to have somebody take that off the shelf, not to mention the person that put it on the shelf in the first place. And there's going to be a lot of effort involved to address that defect, very costly. The second type of waste is overproduction. And this is almost worse than defects, because if you think about, for example, the cereal aisle in the grocery store. If you ever go down the cereal aisle, at least in my local grocery store, there's often certain types of cereals that they have 5 rows of, 10 boxes deep, tons of cereal of that product. And then there's others, like for me, it's Crackling Oat brand, that you can only find 2 or 3 boxes ever, or more likely nothing. So what they're doing is overproducing the type of cereal that people aren't really interested in buying as much, and underproducing the one that is very appealing. And what you want to try to do is balance that, so you're just producing to that demand that your customer has. So what's the problem with overproduction? Well, all these boxes of cereal that are sitting there that are not in demand, they're going to expire, and then they become defects. And for the reasons we talked about, and that's going to require resourcing to handle. The next type of waste is waiting. If you're ever at the grocery store and you're in a deli line, you're familiar with waiting. And grocery stores that are really good at this have figured out what their demand rate is for the deli line at different hours of the day, and they increase their resources to be able to handle it so that people have a minimal amount of time waiting. Or sometimes they prepackage stuff so you don't even have to wait. But that's an example of a waste, because while you're sitting there waiting for your product, there's nothing else that you can do. You're not productive. And the same thing applies to a service or a manufacturing environment. When people are waiting around, you're paying them just to sit, which is a not efficient use of resources. Non-utilized talent. This is where we have people that are qualified to do X, but we have them doing Y. Or maybe we have them in a grocery store. An example I've seen is we have people standing out front just checking to see if you're wearing a mask or not, which is a necessary function. But I wonder to myself, can they not be doing more than that? Can they telling people where the specials are, or asking them if they need help finding something or what they're there for today? So examples of non-utilized talent range from that to, let's say in a pharmacy, in a grocery store, you have a pharmacist that's filling pills instead of consulting with doctors and patients on medication questions they have. Again, these are examples where people are either underutilized, or not, or doing the job that they're overqualified for. And often when companies start a lean journey or organizations start a lean journey, people will fear for their job and say, this is all about eliminating jobs. And what I would respond to is, no, this is about increasing the value add of everybody that's working at this organization. We want to take away the mundane, easy tasks to free your mind up to do more value adding. And that's really the waste that we're talking about here. Transportation is whenever you have to move material or people between locations. In the grocery store example, this might be if I had a whole lot of crackle and oat bran at one store and none at another, and I had to move it from the store it was originally sent to the other store, that would be an example of waste, because if I had planned it right in the first place, I would have the right amount in both stores. And I'm going to skip inventory a minute and go to motion. The waste of motion is more at an individual level, when an individual person has to move, has excess movements in their job that are unnecessary. So an example of this might be in the snack aisle. If Hearst potato chip or Hearst factory puts potato chips with pretzels and other types of snacks on a pallet, but the store has some of those snacks on aisle 3 and other snacks on aisle 5. Now the person unloading has to go to aisle 3 first and then aisle 5 second. And that motion between aisle 3 and 5 is unnecessary, it's wasteful. Going back to inventory. Inventory, these are supplies that are waiting to be used. So in the example of the grocery store, behind the scenes, there are racks and storage areas where they're keeping inventory that is meant to fill the racks when it's taken from in the store area. It's an important balance that we have to drive here, because we don't want too little inventory and then we have a stock out situation and we can't get the customer what they need. But we also don't want so much inventory that it goes bad, expires, and we can't sell it. And I've seen companies where they have so much inventory that they're spending a lot of money, sometimes millions of dollars, just to rent space to store that inventory. And it's not just the renting of space, but it's also the people that have to move that inventory around. They have to look for the right inventory. And so there's a lot of additional investment in managing and moving inventory that if you can better plan your inventory to be just the amount you need, take into account your supply chain requirements for that customer, you'll be much less wasteful. Inventory is a huge waste that when you see it, you can see the impact throughout the entire organization from too much inventory. In fact, it might be one of the worst. And then the last one is extra processing. And that's where you take multiple steps to do something that really should only take 1 or 2 steps. At the grocery store, if you think about all the steps you have to go through to get stuff back into your car. You have to go to the shelf and you have to put it into your cart. Then you have to take it to a checkout, and then it's got to be bagged. And I know that I just saw yesterday, my store is doing this now. They're moving towards the capability of enabling you to check out right there when you take it off the shelf, so that once you put it in your cart, you bag it and you can take it right to your car. Think about all the steps that is taken out of the way. That's the waste of extra processing. And this applies in service industries as well as in manufacturing industries. All these types of wastes exist, and I'm happy to talk about those when we get to the Q&A section. The Lean and the Six Sigma toolboxes, they're complementary. Where Lean focuses on eliminating waste, time, money, and opportunity, and on pull systems and capacity, the Six Sigma toolset is more focused on defects and measuring and listening to the customer and following up to make sure that your improvements stick. It also, on the Six Sigma side, includes more of risk assessment and root cause analysis. Combining the two together is, as I had said earlier, to me, the most valuable approach, because it gives you a toolbox to solve just about any type of problem you might have. So an example of a pretty easy to use tool on the Lean side is 5S. 5S is a tool that we often start with when we're beginning to use Lean, because it's easy to apply just about anywhere. I shouldn't say easy to apply, it's easy to understand. To apply it takes investment and leadership focus and takes team's effort. It's based upon the knowledge that a lean, streamlined process requires a logically organized, continuously maintained workspace, because you're trying to eliminate the waste of people having unnecessary motion or unnecessary steps in order to do their job. Sometimes it's called 6S because you always have to be thinking about safety and how that impacts what people do every day. And when you begin to use 5S, you'll find another tool that goes very well with it called standard work. And standard work is simply a way of looking at the process that employees do every day, whether it's a digital process or a physical process. They both are the same. What are the steps? What is the equipment that's required? How are we going to keep people safe? And what is the physical layout? All of this goes hand in hand with 5S. And you can see some pictures on your right of how they designed workspaces using the 5S approach. I just did 5S in my pantry a couple of weeks ago, and this is something you can apply yourself, and I'm still feeling great about it. We still kept it sustained, which is sort of unique for our family. The first thing that you have to do is sort, and in that you take everything you don't use and you remove it from the space so that all that's remaining is stuff that you use frequently. Then you're going to straighten or set in order and put those things you use most frequently, closest to you, most visible to people entering your space. So in our example, we use cereal a lot, we use snacks a lot. So those are the things that are very visible right when you walk into our pantry. The third step is to shine, and this is where you take out your Windex and your cleaning agents, and you make everything squeaky clean to inspire people to keep it in order. The fourth step is to standardize. Here's where you add labels. So we said, here's where the cereal goes, here's where the soup goes, here's where the syrup goes. And this is where you would apply standard work, documenting what the process steps are and where the equipment belongs. You can see on the right, this is something called a shadow box, where tools is very obvious to anyone who comes into that workspace where each tool goes. And then the last step is to sustain. It's probably the hardest, but this is where you're going to need to audit and make sure that you're keeping everything up to date with how you originally set it up. So all of this requires a process focus. And one of my favorite quotes that I've been using for a very long time, and when I am called in to solve a problem or work with a team, I put this up first, and you find that it enables people to breathe a sigh of relief. Walt Edwards Deming said this: 85% of the reasons for failure to meet customer expectations are related to deficiencies in systems and process rather than the employee. The role of management is to change the process rather than badgering individuals to do better. And having worked with a number of different cultures and organizations, I can tell you, you can feel whether your organization is one that believes this or not. If it is, it means that they're going to take a team focus. They're going to assign a problem to a group of people, ask them to solve it, and encourage them to report out and communicate and support them when they ask for help. If you're in a culture that does not take this approach, that's easy to see too, because turnover is very high and they tend to fire people frequently, because anytime a problem occurs, they're looking for whoever was in charge, and that's the person that's going to go. So it really has an impact on your organization and your ability to solve problems for customers. Once you start taking the Lean Six Sigma approach, you're going to begin to see how it unearths costs that you didn't realize you had before, or at least you weren't able to put your arms around before. We call this the iceberg chart, because what's above the level, the water level, are things that are fairly easy to identify and often are measured. These are things like rework or rejects, inspection, or scrap. And they're important, but they're not the most powerful things, costs that you have that could end up sinking your ship. That's what's underneath the line. These are things like lost sales and long cycle times, invoice overpayments, and customers in government, customers give up on required processes and they just go do what they think is right because they can't wait on you. Late delivery, sometimes lawsuits. These are things that are below the surface, harder to put your arms around, but this is where, when you start to use a Lean Six Sigma approach, you begin to actually impact these things. And that's why Motorola and GE both discovered they actually saved money when they began pursuing this. It's applicable in government as it is in industry, because citizens are customers and there is a cost to poor quality. You see it in reduced tax revenue. or license revenue. You see it in lawsuits, high operating costs, and increased cycle time. Sometimes people move out of your city or your area. Developers choose to develop elsewhere outside of your city. And sometimes you get low program participation, meaning you have a certain amount of funding to accomplish a task, but you can only support so many people with that funding. Whereas if you start using Lean Six Sigma, and we have seen this in practice, now you can sometimes increase by 30, 40, 50% the number of people you can help with that same funding. So Lean Six Sigma can help because it helps groups to understand what are the citizens' concern and increase their level of service and capacity to serve, all the while more efficiently, reducing defects and simplifying and speeding up processes. So I've seen it be very helpful in government as well as in industrial examples and in healthcare. Once you start pursuing this, you'll see there's a big difference between a traditional culture and a Lean Six Sigma culture. I already talked about blaming people versus the process, but a traditional culture is more reactive usually, whereas Lean Six Sigma one is proactive. It's thinking about risks ahead of time and mitigating those. In the traditional culture, it's company focused and functional focused and often hierarchical, where in this Lean Six Sigma culture, it's focused on the customer. The process is where you spend most of your time, and it often crosses multiple functions. And empowered teams are the ones that are delivering results. It enables more, better, clear, defined ownership, and it's really more fun to work in an organization like this, in my experience. So let's say that I've convinced you and you're ready to start. Where do you start? Sometimes people say, I don't even know where to begin. Well, I always say, listen to your customers and your employees. They know. Where's your biggest pain point? Where are people complaining? Sometimes you have a big cost vacuum and there's substantial cost in an area, you don't know why. Or sometimes you have a problem that is easily described with customer data, but you hadn't thought to do that before. And sometimes you just have strategic priorities that aren't being addressed and you need a way to tackle them. Then I would ask, where are your most talented resources? You want to put, in terms of people who are learning and applying this, you want to put your great leaders, your analytical resources, and your teams that work well together on it first, because it's important that you get quick wins. And you want the kind of people that are going to persevere. This is learning. Something like this is new, and it'll take people time to apply it effectively. So you also want leaders that are willing to try something new. They're going to have to be patient. They're going to have to be involved and communicate frequently with the team. You might have to help redirect the team if they hit a dead end. In my experience of doing hundreds of projects, I would say a good 15 to 20% of them die on the vine because we didn't know what was really going on. We had an assumption based on what we thought was happening, but we actually find something different altogether is the real problem. And then finally, where do we have significant data that will help us get buy-in from people to start? Those are some places to start when you're thinking about how should you start. There's some typical Lean and Lean Six Sigma team roles from the champion. That's the top person in the organization that's going to pick good projects and people to lead the projects. The sponsor, these are often functional leaders that have a process that needs to be improved and they need help to do it. And they're very actively involved with the team. Master Black Belts are people that have a lot of experience. They're good coaches and mentors, and they've trained a lot of people in how to apply this approach so they can help accelerate how people would move through an improvement project. Then you have your Lean experts and your Black Belts. Sometimes the same person can do both, but sometimes they're more experienced in Lean and sometimes they're more experienced in Six Sigma. And these are people that are usually analytical folks that really like working with teams and really like executing and seeing results. And they're given bigger, thornier projects to go do. Sometimes they're fully dedicated to those projects, 100% focused on it. And I see as more and more people are getting this experience, your leaders are former Black Belts. In the manufacturing world, a lot of really effective plant managers used to be Black Belts. And then green belts and yellow belts. Green belts are trained more on a part-time basis and they'll move up into Black Belt often if they really like doing this. And yellow belts are typically team members that you're going to train on a tool or to be part of the team. Now, I'm going to bring up a couple of different types of approaches other than Lean and Six Sigma. Some of you may be familiar with Agile or Waterfall. These are the types of projects that you get trained on and you're tested on when you do the PMP certification. And then there's what I call the just go do it project. And I'm going to start with that. Not everything needs a formal project. Sometimes you know the solution, you know the root cause, and you have measurement that's in place to see whether it worked. You can use a Kaizen to go implement it, or maybe you just use your own short-term team to go attack that. It's typically going to solve a specific problem, and you use it because it's fast. So not everything requires the whole Lean and Six Sigma approach. And moving to the left now, the Agile or Waterfall project, this is where you have a charter, you have a defined scope, and you're going to assign a project leader to go accomplish a particular purpose, which is defined by your charter. You'll use a typical project plan with a Gantt chart, and the critical path is what you're managing here, and the constraints. You're managing the constraints related to that project. The Six Sigma project is when you have defects, but you don't know the root cause, and you have to involve a team to get to the bottom of it. You can, as you're discovering things, implement quick wins and see what the impact is, but you typically have to go through the define, measure, analyze, improve, and control phases to show that your solution worked and that you're seeing improvement. That could be something that takes 2 months. It could be something that takes a month. It could be something that takes 6 months. It really depends on the scope of your problem and how quickly you identify the root cause. And then lean opportunities are ones where you've identified that there's waste and that you're going to engage the team closest to the line or the process to go attack that waste using a Kaizen. They typically take no more than 30 days maximum. Sometimes, frequently, you try to get all the work done during the Kaizen itself, which, as I said earlier, could be a half a day, or a week. They tend to be a little bit simpler to resolve because you know that you have waste and you're all about the value stream map and identifying how to reduce that waste. And I'm just going to spend one last minute and then allow questions to be asked. So combining the three of these, the Agile Manifesto, Lean Six Sigma, and the PMB or PMBOK, they're all very similar in that they empower people to drive change, that they are encouraging you to be flexible and innovative because you're responding to customers and other stakeholders' changes. They're all customer focused, but validated with data. And then planning is important. It's 100% value adding, but the plan may not be what you actually go forward with. It's this ability to be innovative and to change as you need to, particularly that Agile brings. And I combine them all into this diagram where I say, in terms of operational excellence in a Lean Six Sigma approach, you have those phases: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And you got to get through those milestones at each phase. But you can use the Agile approach all along to identify what might be a solution, implement with your customers, and get feedback. And the PMBOK approach of Agile or Waterfall project management is going to add some rigor and some discipline around using a project schedule, engaging your stakeholders at the beginning and communicating, having processes to communicate, all the while managing risk and change. So that's it for this afternoon for what I plan to talk about. Wendy, do we have some questions from the audience?
We do, Susan. Wow, that presentation was packed with tons of details about Lean and Six Sigma and ways to use Agile and manage projects. One of the questions one of our attendees asked is, can you explain how all of these principles can apply to facilities management?
Yes, absolutely. And I myself have only done a couple of projects in facility management, so I did reach out to some of my experts that I work with about this. Facilities management is all about the life cycle costs and asset management. And so what you want to be doing, just like you would in operation, is looking at all your assets that you're managing and measuring, are they meeting the life cycle that they were predicted to meet when we bought them? How often do we have to have maintenance or repairs? When we do those maintenance or repairs, how quickly, what's the cycle time to resolve requests? So all of these are things you can measure and improve, and you can evaluate the investment that we made up front in this facility. Are we continuing to see that investment over time? The other thing that one of the projects that we worked on around facilities management was energy efficiency and using an audit, a defined audit that became the Six Sigma measurement. the audit was related to like the use of lights, the use of utilities, and different time patterns for demand for energy, different best practices that they had, and then they use that audit to see, are we in each building that we're managing actually meeting those best practice standards? And that was how they measured it and gave it a Sigma rating and used that to improve. The other thing that you can look at is turnaround on work order requests. So if you have customers, your customers expect that facility to be up and running. They expect the power to be on and you to be able to resolve things quickly if they do have issues, particularly if it's mission critical, like in a hospital. And so you can measure the cycle time that it takes you to resolve issues of different levels of urgency. That's how I would say it would apply to facilities management.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Susan. We also have a question from a participant. Do you think that new data analytics tools and techniques like AI, big data analysis, data science, etc., will replace the DMAIC and Lean Six Sigma process going forward?
Oh, that's a great question, and I actually think the opposite. A lot of times we have trouble in Lean Six Sigma projects because we don't have the data and we have to go generate the data. Now, because of artificial intelligence and big data, that data is available. And what Lean Six Sigma enables you to do is figure out how to use the data to improve. You still have to connect with your customers, even if you got big data, and figure out what's important to them and use that data to drive improvement. So I see that actually enabling better projects where you can get to improvements faster. I think the two go hand in hand, and it's going to make an even bigger opportunity for Lean and Six Sigma in the future.
Great, great. Thanks, Susan. We have another very juicy question. How do you go about convincing people to let you examine their process? For instance, I work with several departments and groups who cringe at the idea of letting an outsider come in and give advice on how to improve the process. How do you get started? How do you get in there?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I experience it every time I'm pulled in somewhere, because people are protective of what they do. Sometimes they're concerned that you're going to eliminate their job. Other times they're concerned you're going to find defects and they're going to be held accountable to them. That they're going to, I don't know, there's going to be a repercussion, a negative repercussion to them. And that's where I think Lean Six Sigma, the approach in the define phase, where you do a charter and you get your champion and sponsors on board, is absolutely critical. Because first of all, their leadership team has to describe to them why it's urgent that we address this now, why we look at this process, where we're going to go with it, what we needed to do. And then the other thing the leadership team needs to communicate is that this is not about eliminating jobs. This is about improving the value add of everybody that is doing the job, so that we can streamline, make it efficient, which will bring more customers to all of us if we can do this well. So there's a critical task that the leadership has to play, or role that they have to play in defining for the organization why it's important to do this now and how this is going to help everybody and bring more, let's say, customers to all of us. That being said, it's not easy and it's not overnight. And I find that the leadership needs to continuously be involved to reinforce that. I also find that the earlier you can engage the team in the effort and call them that as part of the charter in the very beginning, that they're part of your team, and enlist their support, the more likely you are to get people to open up and allow you to look at their process. So it's not necessarily easy, but those two things are most important. The leadership supporting them and indicating this is why we're doing this and it is safe for you to help. And number two, engaging everybody and getting their ideas, because always it's not my idea or the outside person's idea that's going to win. It's that of the person closest to the process.
Good, good. Thank you. Thank you for that, Susan. That's a very tricky situation. We have another excellent question coming live online. What have you seen to be the greatest roadblock for organizations to successfully implement Lean and Six Sigma long term? And how do you overcome those roadblocks?
That's a pretty easy answer for me, but how to overcome it is not as easy. The biggest barrier that I've seen is lack of leadership commitment. once you teach people how to use Lean Six Sigma, they love it. They want to get more training. They want to go from green belt to black belt. Because they become more effective in their jobs and their leaders notice it. But what's very detrimental is when the top leaders of an organization decide they don't want to be committed to it. They move on to the next thing. And that's very demotivating for everybody involved. How I would go about addressing that, I think you have to work with the leadership up front to really understand that this takes time for people to learn how to apply it. You will get significant results, but you have to be patient and you have to say incommunicado. I also highly recommend getting finance involved to measure the results of your projects, because once the leaders see the benefits that are coming to the bottom line, then they don't want to walk away from it. So those would be, I think that's the biggest barrier that I've seen. And again, the approach that I would use to keep the leadership team committed and engaged.
Great, great. Thank you, Susan. We have time for one last quick one. Someone asked, how do I convince my manager that Six Sigma is the way to go?
Yes, that's another goodie. First of all, think about what's really important to your manager. What do they have to achieve this year? What are they having trouble getting their arms around? And tell them you're going to help them with that by using the Lean Six Sigma approach. Explain to them that you're new at this and it's going to take you, some time to get up to speed, but that if they will work with you, you can solve that problem once and for all so you can move on to new ones.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. It looks like our time is up for the hour webinar today. I want to thank everyone who has joined us, and thank you, Susan, especially for providing such great detailed information in such a short period of time. If anyone has questions moving forward, please feel free to contact Susan at OpExecs. And we would be happy to follow up and work with you on any issues that you have moving forward. Again, thank you for joining us today, and please stay in touch.
Thank you, Wendy.